Everybody, I'm from Winnipeg. Hey! And we're here to talk about making mixed reality video game trailers. And I got a lot to talk about, so we're going to go super fast. So to give you a rough background on who I am and why I'm up in front of you talking today, I used to work in the visual effects industry for about 8 years on a whole bunch of really, really bad Hollywood movies. And that started to get to me, so I started to look for an out. And then I met a bunch of awesome people, and we made a really cool video game arcade cabinet, and now I make indie game trailers full-time as a job, so that's kind of crazy. So that's the short version of this story, which sort of led me to the creation of these two trailers, Job Simulator and Fantastic Contraption for the Vive. So all right. So as most people maybe know that are involved with the Vive, these were two of the three kind of like pack-in titles that came with the Vive when you bought it, when it first came out. Those games have since changed, but pressure was on. I didn't know that was the case when we started working on these and found out midway through, and then it's sort of like, oh my God. So basically, we just wanted to do something different with these trailers and try to make something really, really cool. So there's this big elephant in the room right now where VR has this awful communications problem. And everyone's obviously seen the cover of that. These are real stock images, by the way. You can pay money to buy these. So there's like... It's fantastic, right? So like, is this really the best that we can do? Like, this is what is currently trying to sell virtual reality, right? And when you're using the Vive and you're walking around and you're interacting with things and it's fully three-dimensional and you're totally engrossed in it, it is so not that guy with the phones. I don't know what that is. It doesn't make any sense at all. So we kind of said, okay, well, let's like look at what's out there right now. And so when the Oculus first came out, you know, everyone was doing these dual fisheye views because that was kind of like the raw output that you would get out of the Oculus, right? And it puts these two fisheye views on the screen, and there's chromatic aberration, and the view is distorted, and there's two of basically the same image. It doesn't make any sense. Like, that does not convey what virtual reality is like in any way, shape, or form. And so then people started doing these first-person views on the right here, and it's just like, well, that's a little bit better, but the problem is your head is literally the worst camera in the world. When you're inside a VR headset, you're looking like this, you're going like that, and your brain is compensating for all these micro movements that your head is doing, but that all directly translates to that footage, which is just god-awful. Like, you can't even tell what's going on there. And me personally, if I watch that footage at 60 frames per second, I even get motion sickness watching that. So then someone came up with the bright idea: hey, let's do a picture-in-picture of someone's dirty room. Then they can see what they're doing. They're walking around in their dirty room, and you can see them in VR. But that's awful, because no one wants to see your dirty room. Like, that doesn't convey anything. So it's just like, that's not good either. I don't like any of these ideas. So then Sony, at the time they announced the Morpheus, and they figured, oh, they got billions of dollars. They'll come up with a great idea. And I do like what they do to one extent. They do these virtual head-mount displays. And they're kind of neat because you can actually see the person's eyes, and you emotionally connect to that person's eyes. And you can kind of get a sense of what's going on underneath the headset. The problem with this is it's complete BS. It's all fake, because they're not actually playing the game. They just, shot someone on green screen, put tracking markers on their face, painted them out and posed, then put a CG, a head mount display on them, and call it a day. And that's not really the best idea. It's really expensive to do that, and you're not actually getting a genuine emotion out of them. Like, you're not actually seeing them playing the game. It's just all reaction shots. So when it came time to do these two trailers, we sort of looked at everything that was out there, and we figured, okay, what are we going to do that's different and better? So we're going to take a look at the Job Simulator trailer first, which has just a little bit of mixed reality, and then we'll look at the Fantastic Contraption trailer, which is 100% mixed reality.
Hello, human. Welcome to an accurate simulation of office worker. Time to job. This looks like it'll taste interesting. Pistons, idiots, and Doritos. Delicious.
Oh no, the boss bot is coming. Hey, you've been doing a
Good job.
Looks like I've got some money to blow.
Shred everything for legal reasons.
Today's not your lucky day, pal. Open that safe.
Holy smokes, this is way too hot.
You've been doing a really good job lately. I think it's about time you got a promotion.
Hooray, it's 5 o'clock. Woohoo, it's time to go home.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to ask you to come in on Saturday.
All right. Hey, thanks, guys. All right, so up next is the mixed reality trailer for Fantastic Contraption.
Fantastic Contraption is a game about building and using your creativity. The challenge of the game is simple. You have to get the pink ball to the pink goal. And to do that, you have to build a fantastic contraption.
You'd like to start it.
Thanks, guys. So, why shoot a mixed reality trailer? Well, I just think it's the best way to convey what it's actually like to be in VR on a 2D screen. It's kind of the best thing we have going right now. And I'm not the only one that thinks this. Even Valve, when they relaunched the Vive, they did their own mixed reality trailer. They got a whole bunch of different games, and they sort of put people in it. They put people on the couch to kind of show how of a social thing it is. And it's basically the same idea. And there's other people that have done this too. Google did this amazing mixed reality trailer for Tilt Brush, which is absolutely incredible. The way that they did theirs is just slightly different than what we did. Theirs is more of like a post-visual effects kind of workflow than what we kind of put together. But the end result is basically the same. And there's other people that are doing this too, and they're doing it live. Now, this is at Tokyo Game Show just like a week or two ago or a month ago. I can't remember how long it was. But you're able to do this live with the right hardware. And the thing I want to hit home about this specific video, rather, is just what she's doing is not just playing the game. She is performing her game. When you're making a mixed reality trailer and you're doing anything mixed reality, you are now a performer within that game's environment. And doing things like adding costumes and having cool moves that look badass really makes a big difference, because you can't just hide behind the mouse and keyboard when you're capturing footage anymore. You are performing the footage that you are going to be putting in your trailer. So you can't do it half-assed. And so if you look at some other examples, like not to knock on these guys or anything, but this is a piece of footage that came out for this game called Blasters in the Universe. Technically, this is mixed reality, but there's a lot of problems here. There's really bad compositing. The camera is really, really shaky. It's not stabilized very well. But the main thing is the dude doesn't really look like he's having a lot of fun playing his own game. And that's a really major issue. You're also looking at the guy's butt the entire time, like no one wants to stare at your ass. And so it's like, you really need to think about all these things when you're shooting and releasing footage, because that might not leave the best first impression on a viewer. So there's also this. This is like Bob Ross, The Joy of Painting. This is like a 3-minute short. You gotta watch it. It's super funny. So people are doing some fun stuff. So for Fantastic Contraption, we basically use 3 different methods to sort of convey what it's like to be inside of virtual reality. We composited the player into the virtual environment. This is basically everything that we would shoot on a green screen. We then brought some of the virtual objects in the game into the real world. And we did this other thing where we film an in-game avatar inside the game, but the camera move is actually created by a real camera in the real world. And this is one I'm actually really, really excited about because there's a much lower barrier to entry for this. And this kind of tech has been around for a very, very long time. On big Hollywood movies, they would do virtual cinematography with things like you see on the left here. But the rig and all the apparatus and everything to like set something like that up was in like, the neighborhood of $100K, and it would require custom hardware and software. And now we can literally do it with a $150 Vive controller on a $5 steady monopod in my basement. And that is kind of incredible. So doing that kind of in-game photography is really, really, really neat. And I think it should be explored a little bit more. So when it came time to actually do these trailers for real, we started doing some R&D on how to kind of take this from what Colin had been doing previously with the live streaming and just sort of like A/Bing, like, putting footage on top of each other and making this like a really robust solution that it can work in like a post environment, like for real. So basically the trick of it is in Unity or whatever game engine you're using, you take a third-person camera inside of that game and you assign it to a third Vive controller. And so then you basically offset that Vive controller to where your physical camera is, and then magic happens. I'm sort of glossing over the technical details here, but just due to time. But that's basically it. So what Colin did is he built out this whole UI inside of the game where I could offset that virtual camera in real time in XYZ position and XYZ rotation and change the FOV, which is sort of like how wide or narrow the lens is, to try to get it to line up to the actual physical camera's properties. And that is a larger problem than it seems because there's an infinite amount of different cameras out there with an infinite variety of lenses, and it's not like a one-click solution. There's no easy way to really do this. Aside from like some crazy computer vision algorithm that nobody's really come out with yet. But essentially that's it. And it takes a little bit of trial and error. It's easier for me because I have a background in like how cameras work, and so I can kind of know what a difference between an FOV and like a positional adjustment looks like. But for someone that's doing this without that knowledge, it's very, very difficult and time consuming and frustrating right now. So basically what you would do is once we had all this, you just kind of start going at it. And so this is just a quick first test that I did in my basement where I'm just overlaying the footage, and I kind of released this on Twitter, and everyone was like, whoa, this is super cool, it's there, things are happening. And I'm like, yeah, okay, but we're just getting started. So this is the first test. I'm literally just overlaying the footage on top of it, and then I wanted to like move the camera. I convinced like my friend Vince to come over and start, okay, we got to start doing some tests moving the camera. And basically what we were doing for about 2 or 3 weeks is just figuring out all the problems that we needed to solve so that when we got on set, because we had 1 day to shoot it, we didn't run into any like show-stopping bugs or anything. And one of the biggest things about this video in particular is he's playing the game, he's playing Fantastic Contraption, but again, this isn't engaging to watch. And so we really started to quickly realize that, okay, we're gonna have to make this a performance. It's gonna have to be scripted to some degree. We're not just gonna be able to just let him play and hope we get some interesting shots. So I sat there over the course of when we were doing this and playing the games, figuring out what do we need to show off from the game specifically, and how are we gonna show that off in the most engaging way. And the other things, there's the real technical things the camera is jittery here, so we knew we needed a good stabilizer. The camera I'm using is very old and doesn't have the best quality, so we needed to figure out a better way to do this. So in the end, what we ended up shooting on was a Sony a7S II on a Movi Steadicam, and this is an expensive piece of gear. I mean, the lens alone is like $2,000, the camera's $2,000, the Movi is like $5,000 or $3,000 or whatever the heck it is. It's too expensive. They own it, I don't personally. Yeah, you need to invest in some decent gear if you want this to actually really look good, because the lower quality you start to go, that kind of all trickles down, right? So once we kind of figured out how we wanted to mount the Vive controller and make sure it's literally on there with zip ties and putty, but it worked really, really well. So once we had everything kind of in set, we knew this is what we wanted to do. We did one last test in my basement, and this is by far the most popular thing I've ever tweeted in my life. It went crazy, and people just really, really liked this video. And this was sort of okay, everything's working. The camera motion feels nice and smooth. It's weighty. There's a nice wide field of view, so you can get all the contraption in there with the person and feel them in the environment. There's just a lot going on there that feels really, really right. So once we did that, we knew we were on the right track. So then came the time to actually do this for real and shoot it on the green screen. So this is just the first take, literally. I like showing this one because it's funny, of what we actually ended up doing every single time we needed to do a take.
Camera's rolling.
Camera's rolling. Gameplay is rolling. Slate 1. Good. Controller calibration. Okay, we'll have to watch for that. Okay, controllers off and action. So again, this isn't super engaging. Like, this is the first test. We're just kind of like getting into the flow of things, which you kind of have to do on set. But this just kind of shows you this is a raw composite. There is like no light wrap, there's no motion blur, and there's the light stands get in the way, you know, and so there's post involved because you have to rotoscope all that out. And you know, you get bad edges in certain cases depending on certain camera angles and things. But this is essentially the raw stuff that you get, and you try to like, you know, cut something that's really interesting out of this. Like once you get into the flow when you're on set, it works a lot better. But yeah, this is basically it. And so technically the way that this works, the footage is broken into layers. So obviously we're shooting with the camera. We have, you know, the green screen footage. And this is just Colin here playing the game, just the raw green screen. And we'll fade in the foreground. And basically it's on blue. That's sort of the way that Colin developed it. And we just kind of pop that in front. And the way the game works is basically Colin developed the system whereby anything between the head mount display and the camera, which let's pretend is over there, gets popped into that foreground layer in Unity. And I'll show you how that looks in a second. And then basically anything behind the head mount display gets popped into the background, and you sandwich it all together, and then you do a bunch of like compositing magic with light wrap and color correction and motion blur and things like that to kind of smooth it all together and make it look nice, and then Bob's your uncle, mixed reality. So in terms of how you just go from there, this is basically what you end up doing. You end up spending hours and hours and hours and hours in After Effects to kind of put this thing together. And there was a little bit of, you know, you have to do rotoscoping when hands go over top of light stands and things like that. And getting proper light wrap and all that, it takes a lot of time to get everything looking right. And then fixing like little budges and edge cases there where things aren't properly layered where they're supposed to be. So it's not a perfect solution, but it works really, really well. And if you have the footage, you can, you know, massage things in post in order to make it look right. So in terms of what you're actually getting out of Unity, this is basically the going method right now. So the screen is split up into 4 quadrants, and in the upper right-hand quadrant here is the foreground view. This is everything in front of the head-mounted display and between the camera. This is everything in the background, and this is the foreground and background kind of smushed together into one view here. And just as a side point, this is actually what we use for the background in most of the cases, just because of like, you don't get the shadows from this view in this view, but the shadows are in here, so we just ended up using that most of the time. And another side point is this is the head mount display view here, and it's a smooth head mount display view, and we'll talk about that more in a few minutes. But that's basically it. And so this is a system that Colin developed before Steam kind of had their own sort of thing going on, and Steam's is a little bit different. And if you're building your game with Unity and you use the Steam VR plugin, you kind of get this mixed reality mode for free. If you have a third Vive controller attached to your game when you fire it up, it'll automatically boot into quads. And this is kind of interesting, but what they're doing is they have a full alpha channel in this corner, a foreground view in this quadrant, and this is like foreground, background combined, and this is head mount. I didn't have anyone to help me that day, so it's just sitting on the ground there. But basically what you have to do in post is it's more complicated because you have to divide this image by the alpha and then post multiply it over top of this and put your green screen footage in the middle of that. And you end up with issues. Now the way that Steam VR does is that they kind of use this brute force method. It's called Z clipping. And basically they use like a Z buffer that sort of adds this line in between here. And you can kind of define where that line is. And it works well-ish, but it's not a perfect solution for every game. The way that Colin did it is he's popping in full pieces of geometry into the foreground or background. And this kind of cuts things in half, which doesn't really look super good. So depending on the game that you're using, though, if you're using something like Tilt Brush, Colin's method wouldn't actually work really, really well because you're drawing these huge strips of geometry all over the place, and you can't easily define if that's completely in the foreground or background. So you kind of have to find a solution that works for your specific game. That being said, Alchemy Labs is working on magic right now. This is something they just posted a couple of days ago, and look at this. He's reaching around a file cabinet. Holy crap. So what they're doing here is I am so excited. You have no idea how excited reaching around a file cabinet made me. But basically, what they're doing here is really, really incredible on a technical level. So they have this camera. This is it. It's called the Z Stereo Depth Camera, and it's a stereo camera that basically, from the difference between those two images in the left and right camera, it can creates a disparity map, which it then uses to create a Z buffer of anything that's shot in front of the green screen here. So he's still on a green screen, but basically with with that information, they are bringing that Z buffer in with the footage into Unity in real time, compositing it into the game in front of geometry, and they're still maintaining 90 frames a second inside of the head-mount display somehow. I have no idea how they're doing it. It makes me feel like this to think about it. There's really no other way to explain it. Some sort of magic is involved. But this is amazing. Like, honestly, this is amazing. It solves so many mixed reality problems right now. There is per pixel depth sorting. Like, you can reach around that filing cabinet. To do that with either of the methods that I showed earlier, you would have to rotoscope that in front and post. There's no seams. There's that strip that goes through your footage, and it's no longer there. There's no compositing in After Effects for hours on end because it's all happening real time inside of Unity. And I skipped over it maybe, but there's in-game lighting can affect the player because they are actually existing inside of the 3D environment inside of Unity. What's not so amazing is the depth map that's created from that camera is not perfect. There's fuzzy edges on the side. You're never going to get as good of a key that you can from doing it in post-production. And you have to use this one specific camera. It's the only one that works with this right now. And you're not going to get as good of an image from a $500 camera that's using cell phone sensors as opposed to, like $2,000 DSLR. It just has a much better sensor. And compositing it inside of Unity, you can't do any of the tricks. Well, maybe you can if your game is light enough, but like light wrap and adding motion blur and doing like real-time color correction and things like that, that's just going to bog down your performance of your game that much more when you could do all that stuff in post. And the biggest thing is they're still working on this, right? So nobody can use this yet, unfortunately, but hopefully down the line they'll release this to the masses, because honestly the way that we did it sort of satisfies like people like me that have been like pushing pixels around for years and years of their life. But for YouTubers and streamers, this is just like a turnkey solution, and it is so much easier than doing what we were doing. So I don't think it's perfect for every situation, but for a lot of people it's going to solve most of the problems. So unfortunately, since we can't use this yet, I'm just going to talk about one of the other main problems. Like if you don't have the money to do a mixed reality trailer and set up the big green screen setup, you're probably going to be shooting a lot of first-person footage. And first-person footage is really, really, really hard in VR, much harder than I anticipated, because you are literally acting. You are acting out your game. And you have to take a whole bunch of things into consideration. When you're inside of VR, like when you're looking under the table like this and doing all sorts of things like that, it feels supernatural. But when you're looking at the computer screen, it's just like, whoa! It's like all of a sudden the whole world is tilting, and it feels really weird. So when I was capturing all this footage, me and my friend Vince, we were basically taking turns. One person was watching the computer screen and directing the person that was playing the game, because you need to have that constant communication. And especially in a game like Job Simulator, where you're using your hands, naturally when you're playing Job Simulator, you're doing this, and your hands are all over the place like this, but you don't see them. The hands need to be here in order to see them in first-person footage. So you're doing this like T-Rex clob thing, and you're grabbing stuff, and you can't tilt your head, and you have to move like this really smooth, and you're doing all this crazy stuff. And it's really, really hard to do, and it's actually physically exhausting. And the other thing that's really, really key is you need to have camera smoothing on that first-person footage, because your head is always doing these tiny little like micro movements that you just don't notice because your brain and eyes cancel them out. But it all translates to this footage. So you have to have some sort of algorithm that basically smooths out all that jitter and creates this nice sort of like flowing view that like they have here. And I like to show this as an example. There's this one scene in the Job Simulator trailer where you're getting held up by this dude with a banana, and you'd figure that's like, well, we'll shoot that. But this took literally like 45 minutes to do, because there's like a dozen ways that you can be held up by a guy holding the banana, right? And so like I tried this thing, you go like this and you shake your hands, but then I realized like I can see my hands, but then they disappear from the footage. It's like, okay, we'll do that again. And then hold them here and shake them slower, shake them faster, move to the side, but then I'm bumping into the wall behind me because my basement's not super big. And there's like all these weird things that just, you don't have these problems when you're capturing traditional first-person footage. So you really have to spend a lot of time doing it, and you are acting your game out. And there's so much emotion that comes through from just your hands and the motion of your head, even in first-person footage, that you have to take that into consideration. So Some problems and hopes for the future. One of the things I really, really hope happens on Valve's end is that they have support for more than 2 lighthouses. Because there's a lot of situations on set where like we had, say, like Colin was playing here, the guy with the camera was here, and the lighthouses were on either side, and you would basically lose tracking because the lasers didn't have line of sight to where you were anymore. And so if we had 2 more lighthouses, or even 1 more would be amazing, that problem would just go away. So hopefully with like Vive version 2.0, that'll be something that can happen. The other thing is we need dedicated tracking objects for cameras, so rather than literally like holding on a Vive controller with like zip ties and putty, there's some sort of more professional solution out there that has some like tripod mounts in it, something like that. And now that Valve has kind of like opened up the whole tracking thing, I'm sure that that's going to come sooner rather than later. The other thing that I'm really excited about is just like support for more than 1 camera inside of VR. Imagine you have full 360-degree tracking, and you have this guy playing the game, and now you have 3 cameramen. And so now you're getting into like esports territory where you can cut a show like a sitcom even with multiple cameras, and it's all in VR, and you're doing it with multiple computers, and they're all hooked up, and there's sort of really neat things that could happen there, and the possibilities are really, really neat. A unified camera calibration from Valve would be absolutely amazing using computer vision. I mean, they have smart guys, they should figure this out. But yeah, basically like, lenses and cameras are there's so many things, there's so many variables, and like there's fisheye lenses and lens distortion, there's so many things to take into consideration here, but something that got like Joe Blow user close right out of the gate would be awesome. And finally, I hope that Valve releases more like options in the Unity plugin for developers, because right now it's pretty bare bones. Like they should be putting in camera smoothing by default, or just like you toggle a variable and it's on or whatever, because all that stuff helps, especially if you don't have the resources to create this stuff yourself. Having it baked into that plugin so you don't have to worry about it would be amazing. So, yeah, that's basically it. Thanks.